Well, our next part of the program this afternoon or this evening, and to close us out and prepare us for tomorrow, is to listen to a panel of young leaders who will expand upon a little bit what you heard in the video a moment ago and address what they see as the three things that are important to them. Introduce to you first Bob Bartee, who is over here to my right. Bob is the Vice Chancellor for External Affairs at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in Omaha, where he's responsible for government relations, public relations, and alumni relations. Then we have Jim McClurg, who is over here to my left. Jim currently serves as the chair of the Board of Regents for the University of Nebraska. He's president of the Technical Development Resources Company consultancy. Jim has a deep history in the biotech industry, as many of you will recognize, and we welcome Jim to the panel.
Thank you.
Caleb Pollard, here on the end to my left. Caleb is the Executive Director of the Valley County here in Nebraska, Economic Development, and the Ord Area Chamber of Commerce. Prior to joining the team in Ord, he worked for the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce and for the Nebraska Department of Economic Development in our state government. Ann Trumbull, to my right. Ann is the founder and executive director of Emerging Terrain, a nonprofit research and design collaborative with a mission to engage the public in factors shaping the built environment. One of Emerging Terrain's most notable projects, funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, is critically assessing the suburban rural edge of Omaha here in Nebraska. And then to my left, we have Amanda Crook joining the panel. Amanda grew up on a farm south of Nebraska City in the southeast corner of the state of Nebraska. She grew up in what she calls a humanities household. Her mom, a professor in political science and history at Peru State College, and her dad, a lifelong farmer with a strong appreciation for the social sciences. Amanda currently works with the Nebraska Human Resources Institute here at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. So that's your panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm first going to ask for the three young leaders here to make some comments, to respond to that question. If you'd like to also, as you do that, frame any additional background about yourself that you would bring to the discussion that you would like. And why don't we start? Caleb, you're the Lone Ranger as the male on the panel here. We'll start with Caleb down on the end.
Well, greetings. I had an opportunity to go out and really look at rural Nebraska as a place to make my home with my wife and my children. And about 6 years ago, started that adventure as an individual that wanted to go back home. I grew up on a farm in southeastern Nebraska originally, and was given an opportunity 4 years ago to do that in Ord, Nebraska. The question that was posed to me tonight was, name three things that I consider aspects of why I call where I live home. And I'll give you a very quick overview of that. Again, I'm from southeastern Nebraska. Ord, Nebraska is in north central Nebraska. We're on the eastern tip of the Nebraska Sandhills, south of Burwell, which was featured here just a little bit ago, about 18 miles. I went to Ord for three very specific reasons. Number one, it was rural. That seems kind of funny to some folks, but as a kid that grew up on a dryland corn and soybean farm, we also had about 500 feeder calves that we raised. It was very important to me to go back to my roots, and that was one aspect that all of Nebraska outside of Lincoln and Omaha really had going for itself. Number two, though, this is very distinctively different, is that Ord had evidence and a belief in its future. And not all of Nebraska, I believe, has that. And so that was very attractive to my wife, who was originally born and raised in Omaha, and gave her belief that raising our children in this community was going to be something of value. It's incredibly valuable to me as the Director of Economic Development, is that I have leadership that actually believes that Ord is going to be a community that has a place in a 21st century economy. That's incredibly important to us. Not all of Nebraska has that. And so I'm proud to say that I'm from a community that does. And the third reason, and I think this is the most important reason, and a lot of times people say, oh, you're from a small town, everybody knows your business, which is true, and I love it, is that people actually depend on each other for survival. Now, I spent a great deal of my life, about half of my life in the city. I worked on the East Coast for a while and got to visit some great places in Manhattan and Queens and Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I don't know if it's necessarily true in other places that people actually truly depend on each other for survival. And that's incredibly important to me. And so I guess one of the things that I can share tonight that I hope helps frame this conversation is that those are three aspects that I find incredibly important to living now and raising children and contributing to a rural economy.
Amanda?
Thing. Well, good evening. I'm glad to be here and talk about rural futures, as I'm so passionate about. I included the bit about my parents in the introduction, the humanities household, because I very much believe that it shaped who I am. As a farm girl, I sometimes call it the stereotypical Nebraska farm girl, I have a strong sense of place. I appreciate where I came from. That's tied to the land. That's tied to family and hard work and a good work ethic. And so in that way, when I think about rural futures and what would make me move to a rural community, I think about vibrant organizations. And in that sense, not just one person who's really great and who's working hard to make that community a great place, but a whole organization that is empowering people, that believes in their community. And that can look anything from their religious organizations in town, but it can also look like a good Rotary or Rotary Club or a good education system. And I think those vibrant organizations is something that's really key to perhaps my future in a rural community. Another thing is identity, and Mr. Sartori spoke a lot about this, the sparrow. Well, as I said, I grew up in Nebraska City, or a farm south of Nebraska City, and half the town is named after Arbor Day. There's Arbor Mart, there's Arbor Lodge, there's Arbor Bank, and that's just trees. It's a pretty simple concept, but that's something that Nebraska City has capitalized on, and they've made their identity around that. And in that sense, it made it a pretty idyllic town to grow up in. And the third aspect to make me want to move to a rural community is good leadership. And I mentioned this a little bit with vibrant communities, but people who are passionate about being where they are, about people that are passionate about marketing the great aspects of their community, it really makes me want to be a part of that movement and that growth to make the rural community a solvent place to be. So those would probably be my three factors.
Thank you. Ann?
Yeah, thanks for having me tonight. It's been really fun getting to know everybody over the course of the past couple weeks in preparing for this. A little bit like Caleb, I moved away for about 15 years, and when I was at UNL as an undergrad, the big thing that I always heard was, oh, you got to get out of here, you got to move away, and I did that, and 15 years later, I found myself in New York City working in a design firm, and it just dawned on me one day that this would almost feel like wasting my life, because it was so hard to find a place there that I felt like I was really, in a unique way, making a difference in the community. And so it was very quickly after that I said, you know what, man, I got some bad advice to move away, and it's time to go back, because the size of communities in Nebraska make it so easy to really, tap into your own strengths and skills and ways that you innovate, and then very quickly find places to apply those. So I guess that would be my number one important thing. Or maybe that's two, being able to use my skills in a way that I think makes a place better, and being able to very quickly do that. I think a lot like the other two mentioned, just that knowability, that people know me and my strengths and my weaknesses, and I can know other people really well too.
One of the things that I've noticed, and you're going to have to excuse me at this time of night at my age, I'm usually in a lounge chair or in bed. These things are a little bit uncomfortable for an old guy. One of the common themes was this return to your roots, going back. And my experience at the University of Nebraska Medical Center reinforces that data. We have lots of studies that show that you're much more likely, and it's almost impossible to get someone raised in an urban environment to go to a rural environment. So one of the things we have stressed is trying to identify very early on young youth in rural Nebraska, expose them to the sciences, expose them to the health professions as early as 4th grade, but we have programs more formal in the 8th grade, beginning in 8th grade. And then when we keep track of them, we have reunions for them, we have high school programs. When they get undergrads, we keep them involved, we expose them to communities, and then when they come to the medical center, every one of our students, basically every one of our students have to spend some time in rural Nebraska. And invariably they pick that experience, whether they're urban or rural, as one of the best, the top 2 or 3 in their education. They understand what happens out there, they understand the independence, the quality of life, and the quality of health care. And then when they decide to go into practice in a rural area, we try to have programs that sustain and break down the isolation for them. And what I'm wondering, I guess it's kind of a long way to get to a question, if that's the case, and that's what the data shows, you're either from a rural area or you marry someone from a rural area or have a significant other from a rural area, is about the only way you're able to get at least kids entering the health professionals back out there. And what could we do? What has been your experience? What more could we do to start early on with those rural youth? The governor mentioned this internship program. We've had that program for 30 years at the medical center, where they have to go back into rural areas to get a part of their education and part of their practice. Are there other kinds of things that we could be doing to look across the continuum for those rural youth when they become professionals?
I certainly think so. I mean, one of the things that rural communities, I think, for a long time did was apologize for their existence. Mm-hmm. And, it took me to leave before I actually understood the value of actually having a contractual relationship over a handshake, to be honest with you. And so when you started, inventorying those assets and looking at, what are the things that compel people to do the things that they do, what we looked at specifically in Orden and Valley County was that, you can live in a place where you actually have real meaning and purpose, like Ann was saying, and you have an opportunity to give back. And when you go back and you talk to young people today, the 2 things that they want more than anything else is to live with meaning and purpose, right? They want to know that when they're living and contributing back to society, and I hate to throw, a lot of cold water on the baby boomers, but younger generations now have to reconcile the fact that we have a pretty screwed up world we got to fix.
Now, Jim's a baby boomer. I'm not a baby.
My apologies to Jim, but we have an opportunity to live in places where you can have meaning and purpose. And I'll leave this case point and I'll allow the rest of the panel to respond. I helped a man last year from Portland, Oregon, realize his life dream, and he wept in my arms. And I'll get a little emotional about this. But I helped him realize his life dream, opening an art gallery and a pottery location in our downtown. And to me, that is about living with meaning and purpose. I mean, that's about what we do, right? And that was one of the most rewarding and one of the smallest deals I've ever done as an economic development director. But we had a man from Portland, Oregon, who came to rural, Nebraska, Orden, Nebraska, to open up a pottery and art gallery and an espresso shop. And he did it in our community, and we helped realize his dreams. I don't ever recall being able to do that when I lived in Lincoln and when I worked in Omaha and when I worked on the East Coast. And to me, that's very, very important. And so when you bring that value proposition forward to young people and you say, here is an opportunity at 28 years of age, I'm 32 now, to go somewhere and actively change the trajectory of history, it's pretty exciting. I mean, I get to work with millions of dollars a year as a 32-year-old and help change the trajectory of an entire region, that's really exciting. Mm-hmm. And it gets me up every day, and it gets me running.
I think that one of the themes we will start to see emerge as we spend time over the next couple of days is that there's a clear enthusiasm about the future, but there also, it will crystallize what we've done in the past will not work. Paving cow paths does not turn things around. And so there are things that are going to have to be done very differently. We all know how the pace of change goes along. Try closing a post office, try consolidating a school. These are all things that go slow with huge political costs associated with them. Yet all of us are optimistic that there's a great future here. So Joel's presentation was very interesting. It looks like, if you listen to what Joel says, there's 100 ways to do things, and maybe we can do 500 of these wherever our tipping point is. We just need to look at, the good news is there's a lot of things. The bad news is there's a lot of things. The good news is, North Dakota may have a disastrous economy 10 years from now because they just boomed over the last 3 years. What are the 2 or 3 things that need to be different than what we've done in the past? Not nostalgic, but as hard and real as you can, to have families like your age have an opportunity to have their careers and their families in rural Nebraska.
Ann?
Joel Satori's presentation was so fantastic, and I think that there's a nugget in there that would be my response to this question. The younger generations, we have access to every idea in the world via the internet, and increasingly so, and even I think the generation younger than us, it's mind-blowing. And what he hit on was how you see a sparrow as an innovation, right? And I think if there's a way to use this kind of mania of ideas that we're exposed to see the environments that we grow up in as innovation, that's a really exciting place to be, and that would draw me back.
Since the context of me being still at the university is going to influence my answer, I think the university is poised and at a really good spot to influence that, in the sense of, I think that a lot of every major should offer a capstone course of some sense that has some applicability to perhaps another community within Nebraska, or maybe their own home state, but simply have an applicability to your curriculum. For instance, my fiance had an engineering capstone class, and he worked with the Department of Health and Human Services to work with small communities in their water filtering system. And I think putting him in that small town environment led him to a position in which he is in Beatrice, Nebraska, working there. And I think that is a pretty unique opportunity, allowing them to form those relationships with employers in smaller communities and rural places. I think that would be pretty invaluable.
Well, I think one thing that I'd like to add to this too is that we seem to operate in a world now where there's a black and a white way of thinking. Our politics are that way, and even our agricultural systems are that way. You have Humane Society of the United States, you have traditional producers like cattlemen's, and it seems like there's this inherent belief out there that we have to operate in one or two of the worlds. And I will tell you, as a younger individual, I believe I can operate in both. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at opportunities in rural Nebraska and the opportunities that are afforded to us by technology, by proximity to global markets. I mean, farmers, for crying out loud, are some of the first people that access global markets. And we have, I read today, a need to meet 70% increase in productivity so we can feed the world. That's one aspect of living out in rural places. We have an opportunity to take young people and put them to put them in a place where they can solve global problems. And they don't necessarily have to do it by filling a job. One of the things that we talk about in our community that I think is really important as part of this context and part of this conversation is that we don't offer young people jobs. We offer them opportunities. And there's a significant difference between opportunities and filling a job. I live in a world today where I am not guaranteed a job in 5 years. The average person my age occupies 7 different careers over their lifetime. If we afford people opportunities and give them the resources, the funding, and the support to go out and access that, they can make change and they can create a living for themselves. And I think we have a very monolithic economic mindset that all we have to do is go out and create jobs and we'll bring young people back to rural America. We've been doing that for 40 years and it hasn't worked. Right? So, in rural America, I think what we can do is look at opportunities where we create opportunities.
The younger generation, I believe there was a book recently by maybe Beth Ryan about live first, job second, and I think hits on some of those points, Caleb. But where I wanted to ask a question was taking Joel's point, and it was beautiful, you know, of communities finding their niche, but everybody can't do a tourism thing. And you're working with Valley County, for instance. And is there a possibility, because we've seen this in healthcare, that there's differentiation among communities in terms of what their strengths are? So one community might be education, one might be the arts, one might be healthcare. And I'm being simplistic here, but what we have found in healthcare, people started to vote with their feet 30 years ago. The idea of having that single practitioner in that hometown, a small hometown, and when they lost that, we went out and tried to help them think about regionalization. No way, they wanted another doctor. And lifestyles, everything changed around them. Now we see that kind of cooperation. So within just the healthcare system, one community may have just a clinic, one may have a critical access hospital, and one may be the hub with a regional hospital and healthcare system for more tertiary care kinds of things. So there's regionalism happening whether they want it to happen or not. How would that work in attracting young people if we put something like that together? Are you doing some of that in Valley County? Or?
Absolutely. I think, again, it goes back to this idea that we offer them opportunities. And we have to be also cognizant of the fact Burwell does a great job, 18 miles north of us, featured here by Mr. Sartori, about their lifestyle economy that they've really built up. And they've done a fantastic job of that. And I applaud my colleagues north of me for doing that. In Valley County, we have some of that, but the vast majority of our economy is driven by agriculture. And so we understand that biofuels, second and third generation biofuels, is going to be an important aspect of that. Whether you agree with ethanol or not, it's here. It's going to be here for a long time. Agriculture is a part of that, I think, as well. We are a healthcare hub. That's a part of that. And I think communities that understand what the future holds are actively building. I think there's this misperception amongst a lot of people, even people in rural communities, that rural communities are dead. And there are a lot of rural places in America that aren't, because they understand very specifically that they have to build for 21st century economies. We can't go back to saving every 300 population town in the Great Plains, but what we can do is focus our energies. The university can focus its talents, its innovation, and its research on those places that understand their place in the 21st century economy. We understand that very well. I mean, water is going to be one of the most important natural resources, if not already, in the future, and we happen to sit on the world's biggest resource of water. And I think that rural communities have an opportunity to play a role in solving those problems.
Yeah. I'd like to make a little pitch about innovation. There's a body of thought that says that innovation is by far the biggest opportunity to be at an inflection point in the economy, in any sort of economy that you put a perimeter around. And the issue is that I'm from Bassett. If another barber moves from Bassett, there's no more haircuts to be given. Somebody just lost about half their haircuts because now we have 2 barbers instead of 1. And so we don't want to deny that barber a right to make a living. But what we need to do is somebody come to town or somebody form up a business that is innovative enough that it starts bringing money from Iowa or from Falls City or from North Dakota or Kansas City, where it is, because new money coming into that economic sphere creates opportunity. And so the type of innovations we're talking about are, once again, Joel gave us some great examples. You take a community like Bassett, and you had a couple people putting together prairie chicken hunts and a lodge for people to go, and somebody else doing something to watch elk or find cougars, whatever it is. You add $50, $75, $100,000 to that economy in Rock County next year, and it starts turning the dial. And so there are things that can be done that bring money from outside into the pot and reflect the needle in these communities. It doesn't take much, but with the power of innovation is that it brings it from outside and adds to the cash in the perimeter.
One of the things is that, and the governor alluded to this a bit, a lot of focus strategically, and I don't know, I guess strategically by the state and by several governors in the legislature has been on tax incentives aimed primarily at corporations and businesses. And I'm wondering if through the Rural Futures Institute or whatever, or we could start a new Moral Act or Homestead Act that tries to bring resources to individuals or small groups of people to be creative and start these small businesses. Now I know there are tax incentives, income tax, but a lot of these people don't make an income. They don't get a break because in the early days they don't make an income. And if we had some way that the Rural Futures Institute could lead with some new ideas, not just to rural communities, but tie government and the university and the private sector. There's over $100 billion of funding in rural Nebraska that will have an intergenerational transfer of wealth in the next 10 or 12 years. $100 billion. And if we can tap into that to help these small firms that we may even attract some urban folks out there to think about new ideas, and so what if half of them fail? You know, I mean, but I think that, does that make some sense about what we should be thinking about over the next couple of days?
Well, it does to me, and I certainly applaud all the economic development activity that the Nebraska legislature and the governor have done in the last 5 to 6 years. And I understand this idea that we want to be business friendly. But I subscribe to the idea that businesses are comprised of people. And at what point in time have we lost our way in this state in saying that we want to be a people-friendly state? And if you want to create innovation and entrepreneurship in rural places and urban alike, you have to be willing to create cultures that support people. And if we have a transfer of wealth that is occurring in the state, that my friend Mr. Yost out in the audience so oftentimes spends his time educating the state on, then we have to take the mentorship and the wealth of our older generations and we have to connect it with those young individuals that are getting an education in the university system today. And I think that there is a wealth of opportunity if we take those young people and we bring them to rural communities that have the resources and the leadership to invest in them. And especially when we're focusing on those niche markets like you talked about earlier. I think we have that opportunity. We failed in doing it though. Unfortunately, we spend all of our time in career placement, and no offense to the career placement officers if they're here, and focusing on taking people and plugging them into jobs, and we don't live in that type of economy anymore.
I would apply that statement as well. I subscribe to the belief that the human resource is the greatest resource that we have, and allowing people to go and operate under the job description that, or fitting them into the job description is perhaps not the mindset that we should be employing right now, but instead helping each student, each young professional understand their own strengths and their own passion. And oftentimes the intersection of their strengths and their passion will lead to some pretty innovative areas. And then employing them in that way, taking their greatest strengths and their greatest passions and putting them to use. I think we saw a really great example in that with Mr. Satori tonight. And in that way, I think that that's a great belief to subscribe to.
I like when you said, so what if they fail? And that's another benefit of the smaller community, that it supports you even when you fail. And failure is sometimes a great thing, and it leads to the next innovation. And so there's, I think, a strength overlap there.
We in Nebraska are, many of us are afraid to fail. And we found that in our research institutions at the Med Center, et cetera, you know, that pressure that your experiment doesn't work out. And I don't know if it's part of our Midwestern religious culture or whatever, but you know, in the bi-coastal areas, they put the failures on their resumes and what they learned from them, as you said, Ann. And I think we have to, you know, change that a bit in terms of whether it's small communities or big communities, especially for the young people who are trying to start up companies.
I'm going to kind of throw a little different direction into the questions here. You've kind of hit around this a little bit, but I'd be curious to hear from the three young leaders in particular on our panel. The response to, is this something the university should be doing? So you've heard a little bit about us talking about the idea of an institute. You've seen the background on that leading into the conference. Is this is a risky thing?
Absolutely.
This isn't your standard fare for a university. This is a risky area to engage in a holistic way, in a comprehensive way as a university. Tell us your thoughts on that. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts as to whether you think this is too big. Is it too big? Just talk to us a little bit about it.
I don't think it's too big at all. Before I came here, I spent some time thinking about the nature of what I wanted to say sitting before you, and I took a picture of basically a time capsule. It'll be a 200-year-old time capsule in 2073 that sits underneath the courthouse at the Valley County Courthouse, and it says, the Valley County Review for your presentation, with virtue we built this county. And I found it very intriguing that Dr. Green presented the 150-year anniversary of the Morrill Act as evidence of framing this conversation. And I would say that if the university does not engage in this conversation and provide solutions to change the trajectory of rural America, they have failed the charge of 150 years, because we have people in Valley County that believe that Valley County would exist 200 years later, and we are very likely to have places in rural Nebraska that will not. So the charge in which I put forward to the university is that no one else is taking this seriously. Policymakers continue to ignore the issues that continue to affect rural communities time and time again. And we have in my opinion, most powerful institution in all of Nebraska that can change the trajectory of rural America. And there are rural communities that are hungry for access to the education and to the innovation and the research, and most importantly, the students that are here. I'm a product of the university system and of the internship program that got me to the community in which I'm in. Okay? What is important, I think, for everyone to remember is that if the university is not involved, no one else will be. And there is no other, in my opinion, driver of long-term sustainable economic growth and development than innovation. And the only place that happens is in a place of education, right? And so I think what's really important in this conversation moving forward, and I have to give a lot of credit to Kim Wilson, who is an architect, and I think she's sitting in the crowd tonight, is that you need to get students and professors out of the classroom, out of the research facilities, and get them to the communities where the problems are and help solve those problems.
She's standing in the back.
Yeah, she's ducking.
I knew she would. I knew if I threw that out there, she would. So.
There's a phrase in medicine that where it goes, stasis is death. And what we found in the early 1980s, that we were resting on our laurels in terms of primary care and working with rural communities. And we had one of the first family practice departments in the country, et cetera. And so we went out and listened. We spent 6 or 8 months listening to rural Nebraskans. And we developed really big ideas that really went at risk. But what we found was that the communities were willing to go. We said, will you go at risk with us? Because some of these programs we wouldn't know the success for 8 or 10 years. And they would be investing with us in that. And they were more than happy to do that. The real worry, and I think this gets to the world of academia, is can we change our culture to address the problems in a new age? And that gets to your interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary issues that'll come up. But I think with the way we are organized in silos, it will require a real push for academia to change. We know in the biological sciences, in the physical sciences, in the medical sciences, that unless you have a team from multiple disciplines, you'll never address disease states and how to solve diseases and cure and treat them. It's just too complex. Cancer is too complex. And I think when you think about rural Nebraska, you have to think in the same way. It's a different set of disciplines, perhaps. Sociology and economic business people and agricultural people. I remember growing up, one of the major catalysts in my town was the county extension agent, the convener, the facilitator. And in some ways, I think they may have lost their way in the last few decades too, as this world has changed around them. But that'll be one of the most difficult things, I think, Ronnie, is changing our culture to deliver what we think we can in a very powerful way to rural Nebraska and beyond.
Other comments?
I think there's maybe also a challenge of how academia is perceived.
Yes, there is. People are researched to death, and people come out everywhere, and when you go to them, we don't need another research study. We need solutions. And part of, I think, what the Institute can do is focus on the solutions. Now, it's got to be grounded somewhat in data, but if, big risk, you just can't spend all your time gathering data before you make a decision. You got to go out on the limb once in a while. And so I think with that kind of focus on solutions, I think you'll get a tremendous response from folks.
I'm going to invite some final comments from any of the panelists that you'd like to make as we close down the evening.
I guess mine is a challenge to the university, and I'd be happy to be the first rural Nebraska community to pilot this whole effort, is give me your 3 best and brightest ideas from your educational facilities around the state, and bring solutions to rural Nebraska that we can capitalize and that we can put forth in actual business development drivers. Real innovation that creates outside wealth, that solves the issue of fuels and food and water conservation and land conservation. We can do that in rural Nebraska, and I would be willing to put my community on the line and say, I will go out and find the resources, the funding, the facilities, whatever we need to do to change what is now into something that is very different in the 21st century. And I think we have the capacity to do that. I believe very, very strongly in the best days of America are before us, and we can solve our problems. We just have to have the willpower to do so. And I issue that challenge tonight as we carry forward into the next 2 days of discussion.
Jim?
I would just add to what Chancellor Perlman said. I think this is the right time, the right issue, the right group, and university is a terrific place to serve as the forum for this effort. I think it's going to be very interesting over the next couple of days to see what our outputs will be. Will they be policies? Will they be legislative results? Will they be social research? Will they be innovation workshops? What will be the things that moves the dial? But that's a perfect position for the university to be in, and our university is very close to our state because IANR for so many years has been so integrated with agriculture. So we do have a real opportunity to make a difference, and I know university leadership believes that strongly.
Amanda?
This is coming from my mentoring context, but I believe that no matter who you are and what your position is in this room tonight, that everyone could probably take up the mantle of mentoring and ensure that our rural futures remain vibrant, ensure that there is a future in that rural community by forming a relationship with maybe one person, one promising individual that will take your community forward, will move it forward. And I think that that is easily done through a relationship, and it's very grassroots, it's very simple. It's not policy, it's not legislation, but it's something that likely everyone in this room can do.
Thank you. Ann?
I think this is a really exciting discussion to be witnessing. I've had this kind of burning feeling that Nebraska is in this sort of 5-year time thing where it's like it's either going to be absolutely stupendous or we're not going to see that much movement. And I feel like this is now, and the fact that this conversation is even happening with this many people, I think enforces that. I have really enjoyed the pieces of the conversation that talk about multidisciplinary collaboration and maybe just taking a moment to think about what each of our skill sets are and what would happen if we combine that with somebody else, and what would that somebody else be, and what could you come up with when you combine those things.
Bob?
I would just say we can do this. I really believe that. You hear the panelists up here. There is another generation out there that wants to make it work. I say to my academic colleagues out there that we got to let go of some of the baggage that we've had. If you think of your own careers, I'll bet you those are particularly in research or in program development, you've probably started 4 or 5 small businesses, startups, in a different way, in a different concept. But you've started some startups, I'll bet you have. You've proposed a grant, you've hired people, you've had a product. You know how to do this, but we have to take that information and get it out in the communities. As been mentioned, we can't sit in our ivory towers and do this, but we have the wherewithal to do this. And I think the days of victimization and woe is us and all that kind of thing, we've got to let that go and get a fresh start and do something in the 151st year of the Morrill Act and the Homestead Act. Create a new one. And government doesn't have to be the driver. It probably won't be the driver, but we can do it.
Let's thank the panel for their comments and contributions.